Hello and welcome back to my next test of Plex Media Server on the brand new Synology DS1621 Plus. This is their first foray into the world of Ryzen based processors, and although it's not an absolutely aggressive top end Ryzen, it's interesting to see them move away from the likes of the Atom that came before it. Now, what we're looking at today is the same test we've been running across all the other devices. There's our CPU and the 1621 and the 4GB of memory that we're utilising on this quad-core powered NAS. We're going to be running exactly the same tests as we've done previously. We're running a 720p movie, a 1080p movie, testing some transcoding, and then making our way onto those jellyfish test files. So we'll be going through them. Slight change of scene today. I am using a much more powerful laptop, so hopefully screen recording should be absolutely fine today. We've got the NAS running here, and if we make our way into Plex Media Server, hopefully this is at the top left or the bottom left or top left of your screen. And we're going to go ahead and run our test. It's worth highlighting, just like before, we're in a contained environment here, so there's a lot of close things knitted in. And I would say that the fans on this particularly aggressive GPU-powered laptop here are probably going to kick in somewhere in some of those high-end files. So I apologise in advance if we do get a spike there in background noise later in the video. So we're running these test files, same as before, and we're going to start with the same file we always start with, which is the matrix. I've already done some preliminary testing in the background to make sure everything was done, and in the background there should be me muting that file there in the background, because the last thing we want is the YouTube bots pulling this down. And as you can see, this is a nice straightforward 720p file running absolutely fine there, and it's running in its original representation. We're going to skip forward a bunch here throughout the movie, so it's absolutely working fine. I'm skipping forward randomly. We can see lots of buffering there happening at the bottom as well. And what we're going to do, first things first, is downscale this now to 480p. So it should be relatively instantaneous. The more astute of you may have noticed that we are running this on a network here at the top. That won't affect transcoding really, because I mean it will change if we can see the file in its original format, because transcoding is something that you will action the system to do. As we can see, it's already done that downscale there with almost no slowdown there in the background. So now we're going to downscale this file down to 240p, which is quite an awkward scaling for any system. It's already started blurring there. We'll skip forward. There's a slight lag and delay there between each of them. You can see the pixelization going absolutely bananas. And finally, we're going to go down to 160p, the lowest transcode that you can go for. 720p to 160p in Plex Media Server. And we're seeing almost no slowdown there realistically while skipping through. I'm going to let that go back to the original quality there. Instantaneous flick back. And that's all playing there. If there is any pixelization, it's worth highlighting. That's almost certainly the screen recording software that we're using for today's video. So if we come out of that file, one thing I should have showed you guys earlier on in this, if we go into the managed server settings, just to highlight to a number of you out there that I am indeed using hardware transcoding, but unfortunately the hardware transcoding option on this is going to be erroneous, because this CPU does not support hardware transcoding. It does not have embedded graphics. So even if you select this setting, you are still using software transcoding. So do bear that in mind there. So if we make our way back into the NAS, we'll go back into the video files, and this time we're going to check out Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop of Horrors is our 1080p test file. As you see there, it's a 1080p 264. And I am going to talk a little bit about 264 and 265 HEVC later on. But let's go ahead and play this file. And again, I've already bench tested this file in advance, and it played absolutely fine. We can skip forward nice and easily all the way through. Nice, easy skips at that 1080p, all of which running at the original quality there. So now we're going to run some of those transcoding down. Let's get it down to 720p HD. Nice and simple, converting in real time. I'm skipping back and forth, and I can hear the fans on this laptop kicking in ever so slightly there. Hopefully that's not going to affect the picture quality for you guys too much moving forward. Let's go down now to that 240p. This is where we're going to start to see a little bit of struggling, I believe. Let's have a go there. We have hit difficulties with 1080p to 240 on some of the Celeron series, and they have embedded graphics. Now remember, 240p, that's going to be reserved for if you're on incredibly low bandwidth and you're utilizing very, very small mobile devices. But it's already done that, but I do think we're hitting difficulties there on that conversion as we go down. As you can see, we're seeing at least 2 to 3 seconds there pass every time we skip back and forward for the system to buffer. But in the system's defense, if you look at the bottom there, you can see that the buffering is still outpacing playback. So a wildly inappropriate scene there we had on screen. Now we can make our way into the 4K and 1080p tests. Now I will highlight, as I've mentioned before, that when it comes to Synology NAS systems, due to reasons of licensing and support, H.264 will generally play in the most parts until you get to the real heavy files quite easily. But HEVC and HEVC 10-bit, otherwise known as HDR in some circles, and H.265, these are the ones where the system will automatically convert even when it doesn't need to. And you will notice that throughout. So these are quite high-end dense files towards the end. In fact, if we look at the Synology NAS platform, and I know we're kind of double screening here, if we go into the Plex here and we go into the test files, you'll see that as you scale down, these file sizes become pretty big, with the last one being a 30-second file that's 1.4 gigabytes in size, which is pretty substantial. If we go for some of the low-end stuff, this is a 3 megabits per second 1080p H.264 file, and it should play absolutely fine in its original version. We can see there the buffering line, the darker orange, is already outpaced it. We can flick back and forth nice and easily. The whole thing's done quite well. Although I can hear the GPU fan kicking in, and that might be affecting screen recording for you guys. Now, if we go into the HEVC files, actually before we do that, let's try a transcode there. So this time we're going to go for a transcode, moving that down from 1080p down to the lowest at 160p. And the buffering has already wildly outpaced it. It's absolutely fine there, skittering on into the distance. That's absolutely fine. Next, we're going to the same file, almost exactly the same size, but this time it is an HEVC or H.265. If we click play here, you'll see the system automatically has converted that file there. It can't play back in the original format because of that compression technique. But as soon as it's had a little bit of a chance to commit the conversion to this rather large file, we are doing okay. Although it's worth highlighting that the buffering there is only just outpacing playback. Maybe if we paused it, it will be absolutely fine. But buffering hasn't completely outpaced playback, and I think that is going to be a decreasing advantage as we go through the majority of the remainder of these tests here. Now we'll let that finish, and this time we're going to play it again. But this time with that conversion, we're going to convert lower. We're going to go down to 720p first. So again, this is the same conversion, but this time we're converting to a lower resolution overall, and it has managed it. It's gone down to 720p there, and buffering, if anything, has improved, and that's because the conversion's still gone to quite a high version. So this time we'll let that scale back to the beginning, and this time we're going to go even lower. We're going to go down to 160p for this conversion. We're going to leave that there on screen, and seemingly it has done okay. Definitely better than the recommended Plex conversion setting that it volunteered during the early stages of that test there. So now we're going to go into the 10-bit HDR. So if we go from there, we're going to see a lot more friction. We can see that buffering there going along, and the buffering is just barely outpacing time. We can see there it's given itself that head start, but the buffering is almost buffering in real time. 1 second buffer for every second that passes. And there doesn't seem to be much of a difference there in terms of pacing. So that's definitely going to be a problem later on. But the buffering has still outpaced the 30-second natural playback quite easily. So if we go back there to the beginning, and this time we're going to convert noticeably lower. with this version. You can hear the fans on the laptop are starting to kick in there in the background. I'll just move the mic a little. But the pacing there, once again, it's just out of sight. But this time it is doing it in bigger chunks, which is at least more advantageous. And it has seemingly outpaced it. And finally, let's go to the 160p. And we'll allow that to do its thing in the background. We're not going to touch anything there. And again, it's buffered it in chunks. Let's go back to an earlier segment. But seemingly that transcoding has taken place. And once again, this is software conversion that we're talking about here. So let's come out of that. And now is when we start going into the slightly more dense and aggressive areas of what this CPU inside this NAS is going to deal with. We're going to switch up to a 10 meg file. And from here, we're not going to focus on these too much. We're going to flitter through these relatively quickly. Unsurprisingly, the H.264 file, as you see here, has gone absolutely fine, knocked straight the way through there. And again, if we go for a transcode, it shouldn't be too bad either. If we just cut straight to the middleman and go for the lowest conversion, give that a few seconds. It will have to think a little bit, but it's absolutely fine. The buffering carrying on there in the distance is pretty good. Hopefully on screen there, you can see resource utilization there. I've changed my setup for this video so I don't have immediate access to the resources being consumed in the way that you can see. It's on a separate PC right now. Screen recording off the back of the system in real time. And as we can see here, just like before, playback is only just outpacing, buffering is only just outpacing playback on this 10 meg H.265 or Hevc conversion. Once again, we're going to go down to the conversion there at 160. Allow that to run through. Give it a few seconds like before. And again, the buffering seemingly has done its job there. And I'm sure the CPU and memory utilization, primarily the CPU utilization, will indicate that. Now this will probably be the last time I start going through each of the variants. This is the 10 meg H.265 or Hevc 10-bit file. Immediate transcode, of course. And again, the buffering is being that little bit more sluggish this time. We're starting to see where the limitations can live on a NAS like this, but that playback is not going to outpace the conversion and the buffering in this 30-second file. Let's switch down to the 160p transcode on this file, and we'll allow it to do its thing. This is certainly outpacing that of the Atom that came before it, that much I will say. But yeah, absolutely fine there on the 160 conversion. Absolutely fine. Now we're moving into the 30 meg, and from now on we're only going to be doing the two tests of the 264 versus 265. And again, 264 whopped straight the way to the end there. And on top of that, why don't we, after that, switch down to the 160p. We'll let that buffering happen there. And again, we'll find it's a little slower this time on that buffering, but seemingly it has buffered that file for us absolutely fine. Just come out of it there. Next, we'll make our way into the 30 meg H.265 version or Hevc. That goes straight into a conversion, I'm absolutely sure. And again, the buffering, even more sluggish this time. It's getting slower with each iteration of this file and each file size. But seemingly it should still do okay. Playback is going to close in. I think if this file was 3 or 4 minutes long, I think playback would overtake buffering. So I think this is where we are at the tipping point in terms of H.265 or Hevc, this 30 megs file, because it's seemingly not able, at least on the recommended conversion settings, to outpace it. But with the 160 there, it has seemingly done the job. Right, now we're moving into 100 megabits per second HD, so 1080p 264. So again, we're doing very, very well so far here with this CPU. Fair play to it. And as you see here, it is carrying on pretty nicely there. It's making its way, but now we're starting to see buffering not take the ginormous leaping steps it did before on this original playback. So now if we make our way to the beginning, let it play, And this time we're going to switch down to a 160p. The fan on the laptop is now really ramping up a little bit here. And buffering is still doing its thing. Fair play to the system. It has managed to convert that file for us. Again, nice, respectful work there by this processor with its software transcoding. Now, H.265, 100 megs. And we're starting to feel that struggle there. The buffering has happened, and again, a slight pinch slower than the previous iteration. And I do believe that last test, the 30 meg, was the tipping point, because there's no way this could outpace playback at this margin over a minute, maybe even 2 minutes. I think it's only barely going to buffer ahead of playback on this 30-second file. I'm not even going to go for a transcode this time. We're just going to let it there, see if in the 30-second file buffering is going to win. This really is a rabbit and the hare, sorry, not rabbit and the hare, idiot. Rabbit, the tortoise and the rabbit situation, but it did win there. So now we're going into 4K. Now this is a 4K H.264 120 megabits per second. And again, it's going to try to play that original file, but this is a non-GPU embedded processor here. So this is where we're really going to hit some problems, as you can see here. This is not a 4K signed off processor, so the CPU is having to do all manner of work here, and there's every possibility, as I'm starting to fear, that this file isn't even going to play in its original 4K version. You can see their original file is going nowhere, and it has just kicked us out of the file. Let's try that again, but this time with a transcode, and we'll transcode it down there to the automatic transcoding settings from Plex itself. And we're not seeing much going on here. I can hear the NAS accessing those drives there in the background. I don't know if that's getting picked up by the NAS. We're in quite close proximity here, but I do think we're hitting a brick wall here. We're getting a little bit of buffering there, but it's taken this much time for 2 seconds of buffering in a 30-second file. I'm not even going to let this play. I'm going to consider that an epic fail. And again, just for the fun of it, we'll play the 4K UHD H.265 10-bit file. This is going to load into a conversion, so we might get lucky because it's loading into the conversion, and it does seem to be buffering, although it is buffering at a snail's pace. So even if this file plays, there is absolutely no way at recommended conversion that this system is going to be able to out-buffer the organic playback of this file. I think we might get lucky and see it play, but look at the way that buffering, caching there of the file is getting absolutely eaten up. I think this is going to be a case of the hare absolutely trouncing the tortoise. There we go. And it just couldn't stay ahead without stopping. So now we're going to go into our final leg here, the 200 and the 400 meg file. So we're going to go for 200 megabits per second 4K UHD H.264 file here. Going to allow it there, and we have actually seen slightly better buffering early doors this time around. It could just be a straight compatibility and ease of the factor of the megabits per second, but I may have spoken too soon there. We seem to be hitting that wall once again. So now let's get that converted down to a 1080p version, an 8 megabit per second conversion there of that 4K file. We're seeing some buffering. It's not exactly blisteringly fast, but we are getting a little bit of conversion there in the background. I'm just going to let that finish. That's probably going to play in a second. And I think we might, just might, see this file beat buffering, but it would be so close that I'm not sure. I wouldn't place money on it. No, I think we are going to be down to the last few seconds to spare. But no, I think looking at that buffering line there, it's about to get eaten up. So close. This is almost dramatic. No, it won. It actually managed to do it in there at the end. Oh, ye of little faith. Let's go back into the conversions there. And again, now we're going to go for the 200 meg 4K UHD H265 or HEVC 10-bit file straight into a conversion. And remember, after this, our final test is going to be the behemoth that we have still yet to have played back with ease on any NAS in 2020 so far, that 400 megabit per second file. We came close with a QNAP, the i5 6-core QNAP, and we got quite close again with the 1621 XS, but even then I wouldn't have called either one of those purely successful. Then it's just kicked us out on that file. So now we're going to go straight into the big guns to see if we can get any success whatsoever. And while it does that, we do have a few more Plex tests coming up soon. We're going to be looking at some Intel higher-end Xeon, the Xeon Silver Plex testing on a Synology NAS and a wildly inappropriate Synology rack mount NAS environment. And of course, we will be looking at that new GPU-powered Xeon inside the brand new QNAP that we talked about a while ago in the 88X series, and we're going to be looking at the H886X for Plex testing as well. But otherwise, looking at this on the screen, I do think we're going to be out of luck, and it has kicked us out. What a sad way to end the video, but nevertheless, what can we take from today's video? Well, it's actually quite a lot of good and only a little bit of bad. The first, if we're going to get the bad out the way early doors, it wasn't able to handle 4K, but we kind of knew 4K was going to be a large struggle with a non-GPU enabled CPU that is not certified for 4K really. But everything else has been pretty good. For a CPU that has to heavily rely on software transcoding, all of these top files, right up until the end of the 1080p, seemingly played back very well indeed. And remember, these are quite sharp end versions of those files. Remember, the film titles that we looked at in each of their respective picture qualities all played back pretty well indeed. Reservoir Dogs here, if we have a look at that one there on screen, this is another 720p file, and again the picture quality will be fine, only slightly minimized and slightly affected by my screen recording software. The majority of your 1080p media is going to run absolutely fine. It's just for 4K, and particularly 4K where transcoding is going to rear its ugly head with HDR, that's where this NAS may not be perfect for you. But I'd say in terms of Plex multimedia playback and transcoding, I'm pretty impressed with this box, despite that CPU. So if you are interested in learning more, do go into the description. We've got some links to NAScompares.span.com. And of course, click like if you've enjoyed the video, click subscribe to learn more, and I can't wait to see you on the next video. Cheerio.